Welcome back to Hollywood Beatdown, the show where we look at films that are bad most of the time. Sometimes we look at films that are good, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. Instead of doing a review on one film, like I was meant to do for this show, we're going to look at 10 films. Why 10? Because it's a top 10 list, so what else am I gonna do? Just 10 random films? As horror is one of my favourite genres of all time, I thought it would be appropriate to look at what I think are the top 10 best horror films of all time. So, there's no point in wasting any more time. Let's get into the top 10 list. Here are what I think are the top 10 best horror movies of all time.
Can I be honest here? At times during the film Dracula, I found myself getting a bit bored. This is mainly because I don't really like these old type of movies. Movies that have long periods of silence. They just aren't for me, which is probably why I haven't attempted to watch films like Nosferatu or The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. But I cannot deny that Dracula is one of the greatest horror movies of all time. Bela Lugosi literally changed vampires and gave them the signature style, signature voice, and pretty much everything that we think when we hear the word vampire or even Dracula. But although I definitely think Bela Lugosi did an amazing job as Dracula, I think it's really Dwight Fry who really steals the show with his portrayal of Renfield. Renfield has a really creepy presence that frightened me throughout the film. I mean, it even frightens a woman so much that she faints. Dracula has some of the best atmospheric moments of all time, and it's surprising how well they managed to make all the effects and sets considering the time it was made. It deserves to be on this list because it's influential and, in my opinion, created the horror genre. Psycho is another one of the most influential movies of all time because it introduced something different. Although it technically didn't invent the slasher genre that was created previously by Peeping Tom, it still brought the genre into the limelight and created tons of knockoffs and imitations in the future. Is it still the best slasher movie? Well, I don't think so, but I know a lot of people do. The film has a certain eeriness to it that no film since has matched. The famous shower scene is one of the most unexpected and scary scenes in horror history, especially if you don't know it's in the film. But who doesn't these days? It's been countlessly satirized all over the place in The Simpsons, by Mel Brooks, and tons of sketch shows. But I've never really thought it was a scary scene in the film. The scary scene for me is when Mrs. Bates comes out of a room and stabs the man, making him fall down the stairs. That really scared the shit out of me when I first watched it. It's still one of the creepiest moments in any horror movie ever. Psycho is a one-of-a-kind with great characters and acting and a totally unforgettable twist ending, even if it still isn't the best slasher film ever. It's surprising that the zombie genre is still going strong today. I've heard tons of people saying that they actually hate the fact that it's being completely pushed into the mainstream. Things like The Walking Dead have really sparked up interest in the genre, and now we're getting tons of zombie games, zombie TV shows, and of course, zombie films. But there's one zombie film that remains not only the best one, but one of the films that every single zombie game, TV show or film has to thank, and that is Dawn of the Dead. I know a lot of people would have thought that Night of the Living Dead would have been a better option, but Dawn of the Dead is just such a better film. Dawn of the Dead manages to blend the perfect mix of horror, character development, and extreme gore. There are many unforgettable moments in the film, many lovable characters, and just many quotable quotes. George Romero really hit a home run with this one. It's a shame he isn't making films as good as these anymore. Recently he did another trilogy of zombie films, but they were nowhere near as good as this one. Nothing can beat Dawn of the Dead, even if, wait for it, I think Day of the Dead was almost just as good. Now this one's probably going to spark a lot of debate, to which I answer, why the fuck not? Child's Play is an original horror film that blends elements of fantasy together with a really surprisingly creepy killer and a bunch of believable characters. Child's Play spawned the killer doll Chucky, who gave me an insane amount of nightmares as a kid. The premise may be a little stupid and silly, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it's a really good film. It is creepy but silly, effective yet funny, and I wouldn't want it any better. And yes, I am really excited for Curse of Chucky. Even though I had a lot of nightmares driven by Chucky the Killer Doll as a kid, there is not a single killer that gave me as many nightmares as Freddy Krueger did. Even to this day I find myself incredibly creeped out by him, especially him in the first two films. That is why A Nightmare on Elm Street hugely deserves a space on this list. Wes Craven managed to create a film that can get under our skin and stay there for days. The sheer premise alone is enough to give me nightmares for weeks. Although the sequels became more humour-driven and campy, this film is still the best. The word flawless comes to my mind when thinking about this film because it has everything a good horror movie should have. A scary villain, a creepy premise, great characters and actors, and of course, a great story. A Nightmare on Elm Street has all of them and doesn't get a single one wrong. It defined 80s horror and made Freddy Krueger an icon for decades. Also, it remains one of the scariest movies ever made. Every time I watch it, I'm literally scared by every single second. Although Psycho and Peeping Tom practically invented the slasher genre, it was Halloween that really set the ground rules on how the slasher genre should be. In my opinion, every single slasher movie from the late 70s to all throughout the 80s basically copies Halloween. Most of them have an unstoppable killer that most of the time wears a mask, they all have teenagers having sex, they all have one helpless survivor who somehow manages to defeat the killer, and they all have suspenseful kills. The only difference is Halloween is the scariest one of the entire slasher genre of the 70s and 80s. Michael Myers remains to this day one of the greatest horror movie killers of all time, just for his presence in this film alone. The fact when watching the film you don't know when he's going to pop out just builds up suspense. And then when he does come out and kill, he does his signature creepy actions like the head tilt. This makes him really fucking disturbing and creepy. Michael Myers has a certain presence on the screen all throughout the film. Just like Wes Craven managed to become one of the greatest horror directors of all time with Nightmare on Elm Street, John Carpenter did the same thing, creating films like The Thing, The Foe, and They Live, and they all have Halloween to thank for it. This is another one that I'm sure people are probably going to say does not deserve to be on this list at all. But I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. This is basically my opinion, and my opinion is that Scream is one of my favourite films of all time. Wes Craven already showed us he could create a fantastic horror movie with the two Nightmare on Elm Street movies he made, but no one was expecting Scream to be as good as it was, especially after his previous film, being that awful Eddie Murphy movie, Vampire in Brooklyn. Scream is a parody of the slasher genre, one that Wes Craven impacted largely with Nightmare on Elm Street. It's weird though how a parody of the genre could be one of the best in the genre. The key word there is one of. I've still got another slasher up my sleeves. Scream has another great premise that is basically just like a quiz show, except your prize is you survive. If you get a question wrong, you die. The writer Kevin Williamson shows an extreme understanding on slasher movies and horror films in general, and tells us the rules of surviving one. Scream is self-aware as much as it is scary, and whether you think it is scary or not, it's up to you. I for one think it is really quite scary, although it doesn't have the atmosphere of other films like Halloween or even Friday the 13th, it's still quite scary. Plus, Ghostface is really cool. One of the films that scared me the most about Scream is how it actually could kind of happen. There's nothing really stopping anything that happens in the film from happening, which kind of makes the film feel all the more realistic and creepy. The sequels are really good as well, at least I enjoyed them. The second film may be a little bit better than the first film. The third film was okay, and I actually really liked the fourth film, despite what the critics said. Scream is one of my all-time favourite films, and whether or not you think it deserves such a high spot, it's gonna stay there. Stanley Kubrick may actually be one of the greatest directors of all time, maybe even the greatest director of all time. His lists of films include A Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Doctor Strangelove, and my personal favourite, The Shining. Whether you believe it is as good as the book or not, you cannot deny that The Shining is a truly fantastic horror movie, unless you're Stephen King. The Shining is actually the first film to ever properly creep me out to the point of having to pause the film for about half an hour before going back and watching the rest. Jack Nicholson gives what I think is his best performance ever as the troubled Jack Torrance. One of the things that makes Jack Nicholson so scary is how real it seems. There is never a time where you doubt his performance. He just really snaps halfway through the film and becomes one of the scariest characters in a horror movie of all time. Also, those little girls creep the shit out of me. They have the most intense, scary, and creepy scene of any movie ever. A big contributor to all of this is the score, which itself is atmospheric as fuck. Stanley Kubrick really made a masterpiece here. It's one that I watch every Halloween and probably will do every year in the foreseeable future. Some people may not think of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as being a slasher, but I certainly do. It doesn't really matter whether you think it is or not. That doesn't take away from the fact that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the scariest movie ever made. There, I said it. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre scares me like no other film at all does. I've never felt so close to screaming while watching a film as I felt when watching this. Although some people may expect a film called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre to be scary because of all the disgusting gore, there isn't really any gore at all. Maybe a drop or two of blood, but that's it. The only gory scene is the meat hook scene. The rest of it's pretty tame to today's standards. The power of the film lies in the atmosphere that it creates and the fear of the unknown. Horror films today don't really care about this and go more for cheap jump scares and gore. But what really makes a film scary are these two elements that this film not only does really well, but does better than every other film ever made. The film is all about creating a raw, powerful, gritty experience. There really is nothing that fails in the film's horror. Leatherface is extremely scary. Everything down from his mask to the way he walks and the noises he makes just creeps me out immensely. If more modern horror films were like this, I would probably watch every single one. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the scariest, most gritty and vile movie ever made. That makes you feel completely hollowed out when you're finished watching it. Although I just said that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the scariest film ever made, that doesn't take away from the fact that The Exorcist is the better film. In all honesty, The Exorcist is more than just the greatest horror film ever made. In my opinion, it's the greatest film ever made, period. When I watched it, I expected it to be the scariest movie I would ever watch, but what I got was more than that. I got a film that engaged me with its characters, gave me goosebumps whenever something scary or atmospheric was happening, and a film that made me go from considering filmmaking as a possible career to flat out wanting to become one. Why? Because I want to replicate the feeling that this film had on me, on the younger generation. The Exorcist is a film that shows us the fight between good and evil in the most raw and extreme way you'd think possible. The acting is some of the best, if not the best, I've ever seen in any film. The writing is fantastic, and just so is the directing. The effects still hold up today. I still wonder how they managed to make that bed and Reagan move up in the air without seeing the wires at all. William Friedkin was so passionate off stage about this film. He wanted it to be the best he could be. He went as far as firing a gun off stage and slapping one of the actors to get the reactions he wanted. William Friedkin, I thank you for being so passionate about this film, because I genuinely believe what you have made is the single best invention in moving pictures since the invention of the moving picture itself. The film was actually banned in the UK for a long time. Although it had a full theatrical release and many re-releases after that, it didn't actually get a home video release until the version you've never seen cut was released. What's surprising is that, if you look at the film, there is almost no blood at all. The reason the film was banned was because it was a gory film. It was because it was really effective and just a good horror film. It's the most effective movie ever. It made me believe in a devil. The film opened my eyes in a way no other film ever has and probably never will again. I love this film more than anything. If I was stranding on a desert island with one film, it would be this. I can watch it countless amounts of times because it's the pinnacle of movie making. It's a masterpiece that more people should recognize as being the greatest movie ever made. Forget The Shawshank Redemption, forget The Godfather, forget Pulp Fiction. The Exorcist deserves that #1 spot on the top 250 films on IMDb. It doesn't deserve 204th place. The Exorcist is over 150 places below The Dark Knight Rises. How does that work? The Dark Knight Rises, I'm sorry to say, was not that good of a film in my opinion. The Exorcist is an absolute classic that has never been topped since its release date over 40 years ago. Please, give this film the recognition it deserves. Rate it 10 out of 10 on IMDb, get it higher than the 204th place. The Exorcist is the best film ever made, and whatever you say will not make me think otherwise.
So of course, they're mainly opinionated. Some of them you won't agree with, but they're just what I thought were the best. So, thanks for watching, guys. I promise a proper review will be out next week. I'll see you next week for another Hollywood Beatdown.